Well, welcome to the BJCP group. This is kind of behind the curtain. We're starting a few minutes early. I have Jeremy Danner with me right now. Pete's going to join us in just a minute. But Jeremy is the beer ambassador for Boulevard Brewing in Kansas City, Missouri. And Jeremy's going to start telling us a little bit about the Tank 7. I've got one right here. I'm going to try and bring it up on screen with the new beer cam. So we'll see how well that works. So Jeremy, a lot of the folks on this webinar are BJCP beer judges. Excuse me, that were wannabe BJCP beer judges. And so an important part of our understanding of beer is to kind of get a commercial calibration is kind of what the going term is. So would you unpack a Tank 7 for us and tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So Tank 7 actually is the base beer for one of our Smokestack Series limited release beers, a beer called Saison Brett, which I believe is our best beer. I always say that's not an opinion, that's a fact. But we had a batch of Saison Brett sitting in Tank 7, waiting to be transferred down the road to an offsite bottling facility that we call 3030, because that's the address. And we were tasting the beer, out of the tank during fermentation, tasting at the end of fermentation as we do, and we discovered the beer was quite good on its own before it had been inoculated with Brettanomyces and before it had gotten kind of earthy and funky. So the idea was we would take some of this beer, we kegged it off by hand, took it to a beer fest called KC Beer Fest, and we started pouring it as a dry hop Saison. Word spread throughout the fest that fortunately, Boulevard had this really great dry hop Saison that everyone needed to try. And people were asking us, well, it's great. What are you calling it? And at that point, that's where the difference between marketing and brewers is clear. We said, well, it came from Tank 7, so we're going to call it Tank 7. And that's sort of how the beer was born, just by this clandestine effort in taking it to a festival. Well, it came back to the brewery, and sales and marketing and leadership had heard what we'd done, and they really liked it. They liked the way the beer tasted before it had become Saison Brett. And we went to work creating a brand for the beer. And our marketing team at the time, and now that I'm on the marketing team, I can drag marketing a little bit. The proposed name was the Poet of the Plains, and a fit. We felt this beer had a name. Its name was Tank 7. So we sort of we held a meeting with marketing and brewers and some leadership from the brewery, and we really stood up and fought for the name Tank 7. And thankfully they agreed, because I can't imagine calling this beer anything but Tank 7. So as you mentioned, Doug, stylistically speaking, it is a Saison. I think if pressed, I would say it's more of a super Saison. I don't know if Imperial Saison is something that exists, but this is certainly higher ABV than your traditional Saison is. It's 8.5. Bitterness-wise, I feel like it's in line with Stile. It's 38 IBUs. But I think the late and dry hopping with Amarillo, there's Calypso, Lemon Drop, and Citra in the dry hop as well, is decidedly non-Belgian. It's not as earthy or herbal as some of those beers might be, but it's sort of become the standard for kind of the American Saison, so much so, in fact, that we're stepping away from calling it farmhouse ale on the label. We're going to call it American Saison. Back in it was in 2009, we were working on branding this beer, with the 10th year this year. We had just retired a beer called Saison from our Smokestack series. So we were a little nervous about saying Tank 7 was a Saison, given sort of the lack of success with a beer called Saison. So we stepped away from that, called it a farmhouse ale, because we felt that, farmhouse ale includes Saison and Bière de Garde and Wit. We still felt good about that. So for me, this beer it's a very simple recipe. We're using our pale malt. It's 97.4% of the malt bill. Malted wheat is 2.6%. We're getting a little bit of gravity from an addition of dextrose midway through the boil, allowing us to get, boost the ABV without adding body to the final beer. And then we're bittering it with Bravo. And then at the end of the boil, it's Cascade and Amarillo. And then we ferment this. Actually, we're not using a straight Saison yeast. We're using our Belgian yeast strain that I always tell people to get Y yeast 3787 or a high gravity Trappist strain if you're attempting to reproduce Tank 7. We start fermentation at 19 and let it rise to 21. Once we reach 7 Plato, we temp up to 23 and let it ride out, finishing at around 2.2 Plato is our final gravity. For me, and feel free to jump in, I know I'm talking a lot, but for me, Tank 7 sort of represents an expression of bright, fruity Belgian esters. And phenols, I get a lot of bubblegum and clove. I get some banana. And then combined with the notes we get from the late hopping and the dry hopping, I get a lot of citrus, a lot of grapefruit, obviously, from Amarillo. So I get almost like a juicy fruit character from that bubblegum and clove, and then that really citrusy dry hop character. And then we get a touch of black pepper from our Belgian yeast strain. We've got to take a break and drink a little bit. Hey, there's Pete. What up, Pete? But yeah, I think this beer is really interesting because it is so simple as far as the recipe goes, yet it comes out so complex. I think the beer presents a little sweet, even though it finishes fairly dry due to the high alcohol and the fact that the hops are so fruity and citrusy and our yeast is so fruity. But it's interesting. Tank 7 has grown to become our number 2 seller by volume, which is crazy. That this 8.5% dry hop Saison is now the number 2 beer for Boulevard Brewing Company. It's just behind unfiltered wheat beer and just ahead of our first beer we ever brewed, Pale Ale.
So yeah, I am amazed how smooth it is, and the alcohol really sneaks up on you. I mean, it's
frightening.
It's a real 8% beer.
Yeah, it's 8.5. We always tell people that everyone has a Tank 7 story from the first time they drink it without realizing how high the ABV is. It's easy to kind of get a little far down the road without realizing what's happening until it's happened. So we always tell people, we refer to smokestack beers as destination beers, and that you want to be at your destination when you begin drinking them.